Really got a WD-40 that hinges on that bathroom door. It's like,
Do you have some down here?
yeah, it's in the medicine drawer.
It is basically medicine.
It's door medicine.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 11D6 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam. I'm trying to parse that number that Seth just said.
I'm Sam and I make art.
And today is September 18th, 2017. Before we get started, we have a warning. Anything could happen on this show. There's going to be profanity, and then we're going to talk about some other stuff. So if you're a child, get out of here. All right, let's get to the news, gentlemen.
All right.
For starters, we have to talk about plants. We got them.
Yeah.
They're in the office.
Yep.
Well, it's funny. We found out that there's this whole industry that revolves around
Plants.
bringing office plants to an office, and you pay them. It's like a subscription service. It's like the Netflix of plants, I guess. Is
Plantflix.
if we were pitching this in Silicon
Net
Valley.
plants. Why isn't there a netplants.com?
Net plants.
There probably is. Look at it.
Actually, probably is.
But yeah, so what happens is they bring in, we just pay essentially a subscription every month, and they bring in 6 huge, healthy tree-like plants into our basement, which now looks hilarious. It's like a jungle in here because we don't have much space. There's these 2 like 7-foot trees.
They're just looming.
In the corners of the office, and then a bunch of little guys all over the place. And then what they do is every 2 weeks, someone comes by, sort of check up on them, feed them, whatever you do to plants, sing to them. I don't know.
They
And
rub the
then
leaves to give them leaf massages.
They have those little, those little flute things they use for snakes.
Yeah,
They sit there.
They charm the
They
plants.
charm the plants.
So you get your plants all charmed up and
It is
stuff.
a little
and then,
distracting.
It is.
and then if the plant starts to look ugly, not die, but look ugly,
If it just kind of gives someone like a stink eye.
then they just replace it. They'll just take it and they'll just swap it out with the same plant, but a different one. They're the same species, but different plant.
I wonder how far this goes. Like if we tell them like, yeah, this plant was giving us some attitude last week. You know,
Adam was trying to charm it. It sort of,
poked him in the back with
poked
its
him.
leaf. With its leaf.
It has poked me as I walked by it.
Yeah, we can't let that stand.
Yeah.
Nope.
So, but then
Ship it back.
there's a whole industry around this, which is
Kind of
crazy
awesome.
and awesome. It's like you just rent plants.
Well, it's for that. It's for people who are in that Venn diagram, which I believe is almost everybody. Which is like who believe it's nice to have plants around, but also don't want to have to take care of plants.
Or deal with,
That is literally everybody.
or deal with them when they're super ugly. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It did make me think that maybe I should put some small plants on my desk, but then I was like, I have to take care of these.
I guess.
Yeah.
It's like renting an apartment, or what? Like it's
Just let somebody else do it.
yeah. You like I want this thing in my life, but I don't want the responsibility of managing it.
But they're supposed to. I mean, having plants in the office is supposedly very good for a whole variety of reasons because it's just apparently it's good for people to see other live things
Other than people,
other than human beings day to day. So
Yeah,
we're trying
human
that
beings don't have enough sort of greenness and color variation, and so having greenness of some form.
Yeah.
I think
If we had orcs, maybe that would be the same
That would
thing.
probably
You can
sufficient.
get plants,
Yeah.
or just have
just
orcs
orcs.
around.
yeah.
Look at
Orcs
green.
also they enrich the air around them.
They do.
They photosynthesize real good. All right, let's talk about the warehouse.
Actually, wait, hold on.
What?
Do orcs photosynthesize? Because they are green.
Yeah.
They probably do.
Isn't
No,
that-
I mean, as we all know, orcs are normally brown, but they turn green because they got exposed to the demon blood of Manaroth. I mean, I think we all know.
Well, that's World of Warcraft lore, but they're always
they're
green.
kind of always green.
No,
in
because the
every
orcs
thing.
in Lord of the Rings, they're like
Earth,
Are they
but they're
brown?
made from the earth.
that's true.
Remember, they're like
straight up.
they're like
They're
toads.
dirt
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. So yeah, I bet they would have photosynthesis.
The
so
green
they,
ones, though.
So they wouldn't
The
even need to
orcs
feed on
the
anything.
orcs in Warhammer, they reproduce through spores.
Yeah, they're actually a fungus, right?
They're a fungus.
That's the most fun version of that entire
Are
fantasy
they a
trope
fungus
version.
with photosynthesis? Because normally fungi do not have.
No, they don't
that.
have photosynthesis.
No, okay.
They
But they are green.
But they get activated by
green.
battle or something like that. Like the spores get activated by going crazy and fighting people, which is why they're so violent.
It's pretty whack.
Pretty cool.
That's pretty good lore, though. I like.
All right, I want to dive into this next item, which is the warehouse concept.
warehouse
So, I don't think I talked about this last week, but
Airtable plug.
this is an Airtable plug again.
I think you
Airtable.
might have talked
It's
about this
amazing.
last week.
Maybe a little bit.
Can't remember.
Okay, so here's the problem, which is I was organizing my basement, trying to put stuff in places to be able to find it. And I realized upon opening a few boxes that there were surprises of things that were in those boxes. In other words, I own things that I do not know that I own.
Yeah.
I'm also storing things.
This is a common thing
that I do not know that I am storing, which means, frankly, that there's a huge amount of waste happening there, right? Because it was actually the case that I had bought like a dowel rod or something to do some repair in the house or add like a hanging thing. And I already had 10 feet of dowel rod in the basement that was just sort of like in the back.
just ready to go.
Ready to go. So in other words,
Now you got 11 feet of
I'm
dowel
wasting
rod.
space. Yeah. I'm wasting space. I'm wasting money. I'm like trying, like we've talked a lot about systems and offloading your mental work to more trustworthy systems in a brain. And after sort of doing a little bit of this of storage stuff, I got really aggravated because I was like, why am I storing all this stuff? I may as well not have it because it's as if I don't have it.
It changes nothing in
doesn't.
your life.
Yeah, I go for the not have it approach.
You know how
we
we say like a project never goes to the back burner, it just goes to the incinerator.
That's all the stuff in your basement.
I feel like basements and closets are
Closets.
kind of that same thing.
So I got very aggravated by this, and then I had an idea because we've been using Airtable, plug again, and
Airtable.
I was like, I am gonna categorize everything and actually put everything in my basement into Airtable. And so I grabbed a huge Sharpie and I marked off. I have like 8 feet of this 3-road storage system on the side of the wall. And I went off and I marked each row. So like A through C, and then each foot 1 through 8. Okay. So now I have an inventory system. And then what I've been doing is just go down there, organize stuff.
So you got a spreadsheet.
I have a
Turned
living
your
spreadsheet.
basement into a spreadsheet.
It's a warehouse. So I go in there and then I just start, putting stuff away, and I take pictures of it because I can now do that. And then I input every single thing that's in there, or broad categories of things if they work more in that regard. So like Christmas ornaments, I'm not going to be like one orb, for my tree. It'll be like Christmas ornaments are in this box.
Ornaments.
But with the tools, because this was one of the things, I don't know what tools I already own. Because I bought them a while ago. I don't remember anything. I bought like a big pack of tools.
So you're not doing house projects every day. So
Exactly.
They also tend to somehow. It's a weird thing because I know I've bought probably something like 6 wrenches in my life.
They just disappear.
And I know I've never thrown them away, but they just aren't there anymore.
It's like pens.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
So the last thing I had to do, so I got all the sort of bigger items put away, got the shelves organized, got all of it put in Airtable. I think I already have like 60 things in there. Whether it's like a down comforter that's just chilling in the corner. Now if someone says, "Oh, hey, we need this thing. Do you have a needle nose pliers?" I can be like, "I don't know. Let me look."
Did
my
you
warehouse.
did you tag things so you could be like, because if I want to search now for this comforter and my buddy comes over and he's like, "Hey, can I crash on your couch?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'm pretty sure I got something." Right?
So you can look for bedding.
I'll search for bedding.
Yeah, or you can
search
just
for
scroll through the
comforter.
list because like there's pictures, so you can just look through essentially like a gallery of images.
That's true.
So you never need to worry about losing everything. And so I was just so aggravated.
So you can pull it up on your phone and be like, "How's this?" and show it to your friend.
Yeah.
And be like,
You're like, I don't like that one. Let me see some of the other options.
Yeah. So I started doing this, and it feels awesome because I now know what I have, and I have a searchable database of it, as well as immediately recallable pictures, which means also that storage is different because I no longer have to store things in such a way that I could possibly see them.
Yeah,
right?
this is the idea of don't sort your stuff, just have good searching mechanisms.
Exactly.
This is the whole basis of Gmail.
Right.
How Gmail was intended to be used was a thing where you just archive everything and don't fucking worry about it. And so anyone who's using folders, just quit it. Just archive it because you can just search for it later.
Yeah, exactly. So
folders are dumb.
Don't waste the energy.
Well, the best part about this, so then I was doing some other stuff upstairs and swapping closets. So when closets across the hall from each other need to put the same contents in the other place. And so took it as an opportunity to, again, purge crap out of there, donate some stuff, and then warehouse the rest of it. And when I say warehouse, I'm spelling it WERE,
like a werewolf.
like a werewolf,
Like a warehouse.
like a warehouse.
Because it's kind of like it is a house, but then at night it becomes really hairy for some reason.
Exactly. So, what happens then is I have these bins which go up again. It's like invisible space, right? These bins that go up on a high shelf in those closets. You can't see in. I have no idea what's in there.
that bin?
What's in that bin? So I pulled them down, organized everything into those bins, and then again pictures of everything. So I now know I have an Xbox controller in there. I have 2 HDMI cables. I got 10 feet of Ethernet cable. Blah blah blah.
Piles of cash.
Piles of money. Just drugs,
guns,
everything.
And then somebody comes over and they're like, "Listen, I need piles of cash, drugs, and guns."
And I'll be like,
Yeah,
"Oh, that
let me
is
check my
in the upstairs closet in box B."
Yep. B
So
for
now all you criminals listening know exactly where to get Sam's
B
drugs
for
money.
for drugs.
yeah, but you can
and
just ask
guns.
him and he'll look it up in his
because I have
in
it
his-
on my warehouse.
Yeah.
So, but now
And
I
you can scroll through the pictures and choose which of the guns you would prefer to steal.
Yeah, exactly.
You
This is what it
should
is.
have spelled it WHERE.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's what Diana said, and I was like, no, it's because you're transforming your house into an organizational beast.
Oh,
Also, you already know where your house is.
Exactly.
I thought it was like,
I'm not
where
confused
in
about
the
where my house
house is this thing?
So,
That'd be a pretty good name
pretty
too.
good.
Yeah.
but yeah, so I'm just slowly doing this to my whole house so that I can actually know what things I own. Because I'm tired of not. How is that a thing? Why is this a problem?
Here's what.
Because I think it's just we just have too much shit.
Well, we do have too much shit for sure,
We have
but
too-
also
well,
you don't
too
even
much-
know what
yeah.
shit you have.
Yeah.
So you buy more shit that's the same.
It's
shit.
the Parkinson's law of space. If you have space, then you
You'll
fill
fill
it.
it.
If you have time, you fill it. Right.
Mhm.
If you have people are a gas that expand to fill whatever they happen to be in.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
With terrible smells unless you use deodorant and shower regularly.
and fill it with plants.
And plants.
And now your space is filled with plants.
Yep.
All right. So we got one more thing I want to hit before we get on to questions, which is we got some reviews.
Mm.
Well, specifically one review that I want to read. So these are coming from iTunes, where we're sort of wrapping up our review drive, and we're shooting for 100 reviews so we can start plugging the podcast on other platforms.
Also, it's Apple Podcasts, not iTunes.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes, this is true. Apple Podcasts.
Trademark, probably.
All right. So this review comes from Gutiev, who says, a hilarious and shocking. Oh, it's 5 stars, by the way. A hilarious and shockingly informative podcast. You'll learn how to analyze business opportunities, think critically about marketing strategies, and avoid pepper spraying yourself in the face while making popcorn.
It's true.
If you
Or you'll also learn how to do that if you're interested.
Also true.
Either way, you got to know to not do it. If you're in a small business, dream of commercializing your hobby, or just enjoy making the most of your precious time here on Earth, this podcast is a must listen. Seth, Sam, and Adam are sharp, funny, and profoundly insightful business owners. Once a week, they pull back the curtain on their work and lives to share the latest in their quest to optimize life, work, art, and the pursuit of gains. Yeah.
Pursuit
So-
of gains in Seth's case in particular.
Yes. So thanks for that review. It's fantastic.
Yeah, if you guys want to leave another review to help us out, bit.ly/CwB Apple.
CW Babble.
It's the
Yeah. So yeah, we've been harping on the reviews for like 4 episodes now. So I think
It's probably the last one.
we'll probably
What are we,
Take it.
NPR, doing our...
Basically,
if you could just donate, we'll give you a tote bag. Isn't that just buying a tote bag? I've never understood the whole like donate in exchange for a gift idea.
Yeah.
That's just buying a thing.
it is.
Right?
Well, this is how Kickstarter works too, right? It's as you say, I want this thing to exist in the world to provide money, but also...
I want this thing to exist, but not enough that I don't also want something in return.
Right.
You know, plus the thing itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's get on to some questions. These questions come from podcast.bscotch.net. They are from our listeners. So if you'd like to get your question onto a future episode, then head on over there and ask. And maybe, just maybe, it'll fall to the bottom of the list and then it'll never get answered. All right. Our first question comes from Pickleberry.
Nice.
Hi.
Pickleberry.
Your announcement of Scuffle Buddies triggered me to dive back into the Butterscotch world again. Now I wonder, have you measured an increase of activity in your current games since the announcement? And if so, how much did it increase? This is the Adams department.
It is, but I didn't have this question before just now, which means I don't have an answer for it.
I'll be doing a review of the sort of analytics of the Scuffle Buddies launch this Thursday. So we can punt this one to next week, and I'll bring in whatever the infos are for however many people got signed up and if there's any increases and stuff. The problem is we have other things happening simultaneously, so there's not going to be any way for us to actually
We won't
say.
be able to really tell. What I can,
But we could make something up.
I could totally lie
We could
about it
just
if you'd
lie,
like.
which we could just do now
It was
You know?
crazy.
At
because there would
least
be no difference.
a 15%.
It was crazy. It was
If
15,
DARPU.
possibly
Yes.
16%.
Our DARPU and our KTV,
KPI. Well, our KPIs are key performance
LTV.
indicator, riches or LTV.
Yeah,
That went up.
our key performance indicators, right?
Yeah, we'll have a white paper out
Our KPIs are fucking stellar
about it
right now.
What's a KPI again?
Key performance indicator.
Key performance
It's just
indicator.
Our
the whole-
KPIs are dope.
We've talked about this before, like the
Yeah,
criteria.
they're measured in AF units.
Yeah.
Right now they are dope,
Dope.
AF.
Yeah.
The criteria that you use to measure the success of a thing is what a KPI is, right?
It's a key performance
So
indicator.
the idea is that depending on the one you choose, then you will optimize for different outcomes. For example, if we were optimizing for cash monies, then we would not be building the things we're building probably.
I like how it's key performance indicator as opposed to just a performance indicator, right?
Or just an indicator.
Or just an indicator. Yeah. Because, you know, if you're talking to somebody and they're like, hey, what are your KPIs? And you're like, well, here it is. And they're like, no. Those aren't I'm talking about the KPIs, not just the regular
Not the PIs.
Yeah.
And definitely not just the eyes. Yeah. No, thank you.
No, the key ones specifically. Yeah. So we don't really know.
What I can say, because every day I get sort of a quick a snapshot of our stats in Butterscotch ID, so I can kind of make sure that nothing wonky has happened.
A snapshot.
And as far as I can tell from that, just kind of the rough, eyeballing day-to-day numbers, nothing seems to be different. So if it is, if we're getting new people in, but it's important to remember that most of the impacts of these kinds of things are relatively small in percentage. You know, so they may be like a few percent boost or a 10% boost or whatever, depending on what you're doing and what the situation is. And most of those kinds of sizes of change are completely statistically not measurable in most contexts, which means even if there was an effect, unless it was enormous, we're definitely not seeing anything like twice as many people are in Butterscotch ID now. We're seeing nothing like that. And anything below that, we actually just can't differentiate from just day-to-day variation and also from other kinds of things that are also happening at the same time, which is all to say, who knows?
No. All right, next question comes from Anonymous. Your mention of Process Street sounds a lot like how we use Trello at work. Checklist template cards, but with an extra benefit of a Kanban style. Which leads me to my question. Do you all use techniques like Kanban or Scrum in your development?
We started doing some sprints this last couple weeks.
Yep, and we also, we realized that everybody in the studio, so we have 7 people in the studio, and everybody has at least 2 projects. Some people have up to like 7 projects going at a time. And we realized that having this many people and this many projects means that there just is a certain level of administrative burden that just exists naturally in a given project when it's part of a larger ecosystem. Because even if you don't use Kanban or Scrum or whatever, and you're like, nope, I'm just managing my own stuff. The fact is, at some point, other people are going to have to know. Like other people on the team are going to have to know what you're up to and what that means for them, for their projects. And so if you don't have a system to put that information into, then at some point you're going to have a meeting or like some kind of a way to sync up and get other people informed. And if you don't get everybody in on that, then the people who are out of the loop you're gonna have to have a meeting with them possibly at some other point, right? So it's the question of sort of synchronous communication versus asynchronous communication. Here comes an Airtable plug.
Yeah, surprise. It's a good thing to use. Yeah. So this is an interesting point though, because a big part of our push internally in the studio is to push further and further toward what we call asynchronous work, which is just saying building systems that allow you to say when you finish a project or when you want to have a chat with someone or whatever else, that allow you to, in a trusted way, essentially send that information out and know that the person who you want to receive it, who want to get notified of it, will get notified of it, and then that they will get back to you.
And then you can trust your people enough to know that everybody's autonomous and they all will behave responsibly, so that if you send somebody a thing, it is now in their systems. So that's going to get managed and you can stop worrying about it.
Yeah. So the question of this, I think, kind of comes down to why. So why would you even use a system like that or Scrum or whatever else? Because as you were sort of saying, Seth, the reality is that even if you don't have a system for it,
you're going to pay
you
for
have
it.
a system. Well, you do have a system. Whether or not if it's actually sort of structurally built into your work, it might just be that, okay, on Tuesdays or just whenever I want, I have a meeting with these people because I don't know what's going on. Maybe that's your quote unquote system.
My system is to be in a constant state of confusion.
Yeah. So we built a thing that we refer to as SUP, which is
status of unfinished projects.
Yeah.
SUP.
What's up? So this is another Airtable thing that we have. So all of it is just a huge list of all of the different projects we have going on. How many are in there right now?
Like 20 something.
Like 20 something in there. So that's one of those is Scuffle Buddies and associated things within that. The other stuff is everything from, marketing some new patches for the new game or for the old games, as well as just sort of general administrative stuff and other things. So tons of things going on in there. And a big part of what we're figuring out next is sort of how to bind that into our day-to-day communication, such that if someone pops in and say, maybe Adam's moved on to some next phase of some web development piece, he can update it, and then that'll get triggered as a little alert for everybody else that we can just see, oh, Adam's project moved from here to here, which is sort of the point at which you as a person would consider, is there anything I need to do about this? Anything I need to talk about, whatever like that. So a big part of our overall goal is to make it so that people can just have the space to work on stuff. And a bunch of what that mainly has led us to believe is that pushing toward greater asynchronous working is sort of the method to do it, and then coming together at the appropriate time to collaborate and do that sort of thing. So those meetings are high power. You're not talking about just stupid stuff that could have been sent whenever.
We have a belief that meetings, of course, there's exceptions to every rule, but the general idea is that meetings should not be for conveying information. They should be for making decisions. Because if you sit down with somebody and you tell them information for an hour, that's now transient. So if somebody else needs that information, how are they going to get it? Well, you got to sit down with them for an hour and then tell them. If somebody else needs it, you got to sit down with them for an hour, right? So by dumping your information into some longer lasting system, then anybody can get that information without you being involved. And then when you have a meeting with everybody, then you can make decisions about the information, hopefully in a much shorter, time span, without having to debate for forever, just because everybody's confused about what they're even talking about. So,
but most of that doesn't have to do with Scrum or agile development.
That's true.
And for that, I mean, I would say we do practice basically a form of agile development, but in a tools independent way. So we have not adopted a sort of global and defined agile practice, mostly because anytime we have tried to those are typically designed for managing projects when there's a whole team working on one thing together at the same time, right? Where you might have 5 programmers all programming, and you have to really know who's doing what and when and what's blocking what and all that kind of stuff. And so there comes a point of scale at which you need that kind of stuff just to make sure that things are happening fast and the priorities in the right order.
Not being done twice.
Not being done twice.
But we're so agile that every project is one person running
basically.
it.
Yeah. So we're on a different end. We're now there hasn't yet been a methodology or a software framework that we've used that didn't just make it harder to work instead of more efficient, because of the fact that we all have our own ways of doing things, and the way that we collaborate right now is in this much more asynchronous kind of big picture way where Sam and Seth are collaborating. Yeah. But they both have a way to move forward on their stuff without blocking the other person. Right. And so that means that we have a lot more freedom and less constraints in having to have people have their work organized in the same sort of coherent framework.
Well, it's also part of our goal is to just constantly be reducing we refer to it as admin work, but just the general meta work that is required to do things. So whether that's, okay, well, I want to go tackle this particular project this week. That means I need to get these files. I need to get this information from these people, blah, blah, blah. All of that is just meta work. So if a big part of that is actually, again, running these sprints or whatever sort of more concrete structure is given to it, then that's not something we're currently, the payoff is not worth the price currently. And it's something to keep in mind, which is that because it does feel like you're making progress if you have a system like that in place and you're doing the things that
I moved a bunch of cards through my Kanban.
And the question is, do you need to have that? Do you need to be spending the time on that? And depending on the team size, the answer might be definitely yes, which is totally valid. But it's always a good thing to ask yourself if you're actually just creating an additional layer of meta work that may not actually be paying off.
Well, and there's another interesting problem with things like Kanban, because in the studio we worked at before Butterscotch, we used Kanban to manage projects. And it was a much bigger team, but everybody uses these systems differently.
Right.
And so when I was using the Kanban, I was using it religiously, where like any task that I was working on, I made it a point to anytime somebody was like, oh, I need you to take care of this thing, I'd put it in the Kanban. Right. And I would move it through the thing. And most of the other folks who were on my team, who were also programmers, they tended to do things in a much more sort of like higher level. So instead of moving tasks through the Kanban, they would move like a project through the Kanban that's comprised of like 1,000 small tasks. And so then each week we would go back and we'd review the Kanban, and it's like,
they
look.
give you an analytics.
Yeah,
plan,
they'd be like,
right?
look at the analytics. Like Seth did like 50% of the team's work this week. It's like, no, I didn't. I just
broke it down
I just
more,
broke
right?
it down more into the Kanban, right? And so it gives you this bizarre false look at what's actually happening on the team. Yeah, it's weird. So
Yeah. The only way to do it in a way that's fully consistent is to put so many constraints on how it's used that it becomes a burden.
right.
Which means you have to use it in a way that everybody has agreed makes sense and not as a way to measure performance and all this other kind of stuff. Because the moment you do that kind of bullshit, it's going to create a problem instead of something.
Which is why I'm excited about what we're doing with SUP, because really it's basically we have two things to keep track of on a given project. One is what's the thing that's happening next, and then the other is just the general state of the project. So going from planning stage to development stage to alpha to beta to finished, right?
But also, what are the priorities of things so that if I need somebody's help on something, I can look at what they're working on right now and ask, is what I need from them more important than what they're doing right now?
Right. And it takes very little overhead. And then when it comes to the actual sort of day-to-day management of those projects, that's still up to the individual person to use their own systems to keep track of that stuff. And then SUP is there not to manage the project, but to actually communicate to the rest of the team about what's going on with the project. So, yeah, I mean, it all just depends on what your team needs, and who knows. We'll see if this works. Our next question comes from Menelaus. Is Syncopus the next step in the evolution of a quadrupus, or is it a tripus? Are more legs better, or is less legs better? Also, it will be fewer legs.
Yeah.
Also, I have to, as a biologist, I have to disagree with the framing that evolution implies better because it's just not true.
Right.
But haven't gotten that out of my system.
So if we were to take two population of quadrupus,
Say we split them
all of a sudden
across a mountain
there's a rift in space time.
And then we put them under different selective pressures.
We say,
And one group of quadruped goes into an area where there's a certain type of animal that loves eating legs, right? And
so the fewer you got, actually, well then, now is it the fewer you got, the better,
I think
or
you
the
need
more?
an extra one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to
you
spare.
need
That's
some
the
redundancy.
question.
But also
right?
you become more appealing the more legs you have.
That's
so you
true.
become more of a target.
Right, exactly. So if you
maybe
got fewer
they-
legs, you'll come across the giant leg eater. Yeah, it comes up and it's like, nah, that's not enough
worth
legs.
my time.
That's not enough legs. And in that case, yeah, I mean, if you're a tripus, you're good. You're cruising.
But maybe you're
Or
slower, because
You might be slower, so it might be harder to escape. But you might have fewer things to escape, except for
The question
the
is,
giant
would you
leg
have
eater.
one leg or one arm?
or 3 arms and no legs?
I think it's hilarious that the quadruped have legs to begin with because they're from the ocean. You know what I mean? But I guess you've got
you still
like
gotta run around down
lobsters.
there.
There's stuff that has legs.
Plenty of stuff has legs in the ocean.
That's true.
A lot of things, really.
That's
A lot of
creepy.
things have too many legs in the ocean, in fact.
Yeah.
It's always weirded me out that we're totally cool with eating lobsters, but when we want to eat insects, it's disgusting.
Well, that's not globally true, though.
There
There are many people who have no problem eating
but
insects.
in our culture,
Yeah, food taboos are they're the same as all of our other weird traditions and cultural things.
because
they're
a
arbitrary.
lobster is just a bug whose exoskeleton is too hard to eat, and so
Yeah.
you gotta
get in there.
You gotta get in there, but it's still got all these horrible legs and like weird creepy eyes.
Yeah, but you
and
take,
its
like,
mouth
crab
is
legs.
its mouth is like this weird collection of arms. Like what the fuck? This thing is horrible.
When we eat crabs, we actually their legs are the preferred part, right? So we'll actually get these
And we're
horrible
like,
spider legs.
Look at this leg,
Right.
And you crack the leg
You
open.
crack it because it
And
has
you,
no
like,
and you
suck it out.
suck the inside of the leg out.
because it has
Disgusting.
no bones, right? Like its skin is
Its skin is its bones.
is its bones.
Yeah,
This thing is an alien, you know?
it's alien as fuck.
It's just a giant bug.
But I guess, but is it weirder? Is it weirder to eat these things that are so alien, or to eat things that are awfully similar to us, like other mammals?
That's true.
You know, like which one of those is really the weird?
Okay,
one?
we got to get to there's another question that we have to hit in relation to this, which is from Giant Muskrat. If you were vegan, would you eat a Venus flytrap? Can you talk about the uncanny vegan valley? So basically,
Of plants, eating plants that are themselves carnivorous?
eating plants that eat
That
animals
sustain
that
themselves
kind of like
by
they're
murder.
doing stuff that animals kind of do, right? So like if there was a plant that walked around
I don't think I'm familiar enough with like the kind of general vegan positions because there's a broader question.
Well,
here
I think
with veganism, which is if there are, because basically the position is that you shouldn't eat animals because it's unethical, right? But other animals eat animals. Well, not just plants eat animals, but also other. So does that mean? Is it ethical to eat animals that eat other animals?
It's like a death sentence.
So there's 3 tiers of vegan in terms of sort of like vegan power, right?
Okay.
The lowest level vegan is just a dietary vegan where you're just like, it's healthier, you know, like meat's not as healthy and dairy and stuff. And I'm gonna be vegan for health reasons. That's kind of like, that's your basic normal level of vegan. Mm-hmm. Then you've got your ethics vegan, right? Where you're like, I'm not going to kill anything. So, or I'm not gonna eat anything that would put animals in danger, right? And then there's a justice vegan, which is the top level vegan, and that's where you only eat animals that eat other animals, right? Because now,
I assume that also means you eat people who are not also vegans.
Anything you eat anything that would harm an animal. Yeah. So tractors, right?
Yeah,
cars, roads. Power lines. You eat wind turbines. Windows.
So you sort of your jaws become the instrument of justice in this case.
Yeah. That's a justice vegan.
You're like, I'm going to dissolve this.
Right? You see a tiger at the zoo, and you're like, I'm coming for you.
I think it is the most.
And then you eat the zoo as well, of course.
Yeah, obviously. But I think that is the most. Internally, logically consistent form of veganism is the one where you say, well,
hurting animals is wrong.
So we have to take
it's like
vengeance against everything, including other animals that hurt other animals,
which is all animals,
unless you can force them all to become vegans.
Right.
So if you can find a way to say make fake like fish so that now hawks can go eat fake robot fish that are actually made out of seaweed. Right. So I guess there's also a technology.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously part of being a justice vegan is that you also devote your life to laboratory work where you create synthetic meats to replace all life on Earth.
That way, as your jaw's getting like more and more tired over time, then the hope is that someday these breakthroughs will allow you to just eat fewer things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Replace your stomach with a robot stomach, all that stuff.
And then just replace people with robots that eat things. Because that way you just now have your army of robots that eat all the stuff that eat animals.
Yep.
It sounds like a good sci-fi novel. Wait, I guess the question when it comes to Venus flytrap is the act of eating another animal considered an animal behavior or a plant behavior?
Well, plants and animals are on a spectrum, right?
Well, not really.
Not really.
I mean, in terms
they're quite distinct, and
there are those sea slugs that eat plants.
But I guess what I mean is like there's a certain level of consciousness that things have about their existence.
Yeah, plants are pretty fucking low.
Plants are pretty far down there.
There's really not a lot lower.
I mean, maybe.
I think
what
rocks.
if they're just
rocks are a little lower?
What if they're just really slow? Like they just can't. They're just they're sort of operating on a different timeline, so they can't. I mean, a tree, because they do react to stuff. Kind of. It just takes them a really long time. Yeah. So, what if there is some consciousness in there? As far as that stuff goes, but it's just so
I guess it depends on what you mean by consciousness,
no.
right? It's just
exactly.
It's like a deliberate reaction to your environment with decision making involved or something. But
which cells do, right?
Cells do
that, and plants are made of those.
So they must.
And I mean, so are we.
Yeah. So really,
we are plants, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. This is getting.
So no matter what you do, you're a damn dirty carnivore.
Well, here's the question, because I wouldn't.
No, plants are just big dumb animals.
I want to go back to this leg situation because you said right before we dove into this vegan thing that what we eat on crabs is tons of legs. So how come crabs haven't evolved fewer legs?
Because we also
deal with
it's kind of a new thing
because we don't. Because this is why though. Because I'm saying evolution is a gradual process.
If that's the theory of the quadruped becoming a tripod.
But this happens on a slow time.
It'll take like a million years.
But you also have to be selecting for a specific thing because we don't go catch crabs based on how many legs they have.
We don't pull them up and be like, no, this doesn't have enough legs and let it go.
In fact, if we actually pulled one up that only had half of its legs, we'd be like, well, I guess this is only half as valuable, but we'll just throw it in the pile.
Throw it in the pile because we eat everything.
We eat the fucking of everything. So we're too indiscriminate to actually cause a selective process on these things. But there are probably those that are getting better at getting out of nets, and probably those that don't grow as large because the bigger you get, the easier you are to catch, right? So And I think there is actually some evidence of selective pressures for various kinds of marine life towards being smaller because of how many
They
of
can
them we
squeeze
kill every
through
year.
net holes.
Yep. They're just harder to catch that way. So there is some of that kind of stuff happening. But there's also, I think my favorite form of selection, though, which is relevant to the quadruped potentially, is sexual selection, which isn't actually, like I said, it's about sex. But the idea...
That's all it's about.
It's only about sex. It's not about any sort of fitness.
It's like when you see a peacock and you're like, that can't be practical.
Right. And it isn't. And the idea is that when you see something really weird in nature, there's a pretty good chance that seems, maladaptive, like it's a bad idea. There's a pretty good chance that it's a sexual selection problem, which is that one way that you can demonstrate just how awesome of a mate you are is by having every handicap in the universe and still being alive.
Right.
Right. Because you got to be if you're a fucking peacock, you're brightly colored.
Yeah.
Visible. You can barely fly because your tail is so enormous. So you basically have to stay on the ground
You
all the time.
you can barely escape from anything.
But damn, do you look good?
You look awesome, right?
So are you saying
beauty is pain?
Are you saying that the quadruped's 4 legs are actually selected for because of sexual pressure?
They might be, because it might just be that quadruped happen to value the appearance of 4 legs.
So glutes and quads are like what they're all about. They're all about the gams.
That's right.
But I've heard some theories that since humans are the only organism in the world that has a butt.
That's only because we stand up, though. Because when a bear stands up, it also has a butt.
Not really.
Well, yeah, but
it doesn't have like a
except
it's a little bit flatter.
But that's the thing is like you don't need like this big round butt.
Yeah, they got the
up.
muscles there.
Yeah,
but they're not as well developed because they don't stand up
all the time.
time.
But I don't know. I think I've heheard theories like humans just like round things.
No, it's because we stand up. But I do like that though.
Look at that
just
butt.
like butt.
But it could be that the reason that we stand up is because we like round things.
That'd be hilarious.
Because we're like, ooh, when we stand up, there's a round thing now. This is nice.
Look at that butt.
So that could have caused sexual selection.
So we became the dominant life form on Earth
because
we like butts.
Because we like butts.
Actually,
you heard it here.
Do you know about Bawfest? You guys know about Bawfest, right? You know SMBC?
Yeah.
The webcomic. So any of our listeners, if you don't know that webcomic, it's fucking phenomenal.
Saturday morning breakfast cereal.
Yeah, SMBC-comics.com or something like that. But he started, the author of that thing, it was quite a while ago now, maybe like 7 years ago or something, started this thing called Bawfest, like BAH, like the old science way of being like humbug, whatever. Where the idea is to come up with the most ridiculous sounding theory possible that still like could be correct or describes a phenomenon. So this was all kicked off with a comic he did where he was talking about why babies are the shape that they are, and it was because of how good they are for punting. because the idea is that if you're trying to spread your genes, right?
You make a baby,
you punt it as far as you can into like a neighboring village so that you've spread your
which is also why they're mostly cartilage.
Yeah, exactly. They're very resilient.
They're very resilient.
Right.
Yeah. So then he wrote up this clearly joking fake theory about this, but this spawned this festival called Bawfest, which actually they just announced that the next one's coming up in October or something.
Maybe we should bring our butts theory.
So yeah, this would be a perfect.
We could put
thing.
together a PowerPoint.
Perfect. Yeah. That's what they have PowerPoints and posters, so you can then walk around and see all the poster presentations. So I haven't gone before, but I really want to.
Awesome. We'll call it the theory of butt domination.
Yep,
it's nice.
Yeah. All right. Next question comes from Spirit Coco, who says,
"Spirit Coco,
would you ever make an event where the community creates new bosses, NPCs, buildables, weapons, armor, etc., that others can vote to add in the game, any of your games, on the next update? Make it so that even the community helped make the game."
That'd be pretty fun. There's been a few companies that have done this to varying degrees, and what we would do if we were to do it would be essentially a controlled process. We wouldn't just say, hey, make something crazy. I think probably starting with,
and also we wouldn't just blindly accept votes.
Correct.
Otherwise, our games would just be filled with dicks.
Yeah. Yep. That's what always happens. So what we definitely do is, and a few companies done this before. I think the one that I saw that I liked a lot was how Ironhide Games did it with their game Kingdom Rush 2, where I think they had the community sort of work with the developers to make a hero for it. And basically what they did is every stage of the way, they started off with essentially just a text description of the idea of what the character was, just like 2 sentences and a few different options in that. The community picks one of those and then sort of starts, of course, the community chats, right? So they start throwing out suggestions,
tree, basically.
More like a decision tree. So the developers can control basically balance problems and that sort of thing along the way, because that tends to be the thing that happens whenever someone who really likes the game comes in and has something that they want to make for it, it's oftentimes a thing that will break everything in most conceivable ways.
I want to be a hero that one-shots everybody with a sniper rifle that hits everything without having to aim.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's your classic community suggestion.
Well, even if they're not completely overpowered things,
but it could also break the story too hard because because you want to put a rock, you want a jetpack on it, but it's a thing that lives in the ocean or whatever. You know, things that just mismatch because they sound cool.
So I would love to do something like this, and I think.
But there's also an intellectual property problem, which is so the decision tree works really well because it doesn't create any conflict of any kind. But if you actually take submissions from people, that means you have to somehow come up with a licensing agreement ahead of time that's unambiguously understandable by all parties, which is that either they are granting you a license to that to do whatever you want with, or they're just transferring the copyright to you as the game maker.
Well, but also importantly,
which is whack in both fronts.
Yeah, but it's also the case that if somebody just says like, you should put this thing in your game that looks like they just describe it. There's actually no copyright.
Yeah, there's no protection on that. But if they actually say, if we say, hey, we need a sword that kind of fits this description, let's have the community come together to like make some examples, and then they can all vote on the one that they want, and we'll turn that into an item, right? That kind of thing we really just can't do because of intellectual property reasons. Because there's no way to get around all the weirdness of making sure that person understands what it is that they're doing, that they're giving up their intellectual property to us. And also in many ways, it's kind of weird and unfair to do anyway, because then in the end, if everything works out well, then we make money off of that thing that person made. Right. But it's
kind of like this has been happening with, because Bethesda did the mod shop thing.
Yeah.
Their creation club, which has been, if you read on any of the PC gaming sites in particular, you'll see oftentimes a bunch of discussion about this because essentially it's essentially paid mods. But Bethesda is actually paying the people who used to make mods for stuff for free in Skyrim to make a few sort of patches of content for the game itself. So in a sense, it's almost like they're contracting out, right? Some of the dev,
right?
In the case of the creation club, but it's one of those things that it's weird territory in the sense that it actually will require a tremendous amount of, if it's not just a decision tree thing, it would require a tremendous amount of, overhead to figure out how to do it in such a way that we don't necessarily feel like we're taking advantage, but that it's actually a community participation thing that's fun.
Right.
And then, that sort of thing.
And also doesn't open us up to legal trouble. As we talk about a lot on this podcast, there are many reasons why we can't have nice things.
Yep.
The law is one of them.
The law is one of them. But also unethical other people, right? Because there can easily be, and often are situations, especially with small independent startup studios, where it'll be some guy with an idea who'll be like, hey, come make art from my thing. We can do a profit share on it or whatever, right? And the agreement's written up, and then it turns out that the whole thing kind of falls apart. And then there's this question of who actually owns
what piece of work,
right? Because it's actually super important. And this kind of thing happens just constantly all the time, because it's not just how the law works. It actually is important to keep track of who owns what and what their rights are with respect to that stuff. And for the most part, people they haven't thought about it enough to understand what they're giving up if they contribute something to some other cause, without clearly understanding that they have now lost rights to it, or they've lost the right to do something specific with it in the future, or whatever. So it gets into some weird territory that I think for the most part we just want to avoid because it's real fucking murky.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think sometimes it may sound like we overthink some of these things, but it's just because we really genuinely want to not have troubled seas. And so anything that we look at and we analyze along these lines of what are the risks inherent in this particular process, is there an easy way for us to mitigate that, or is it the case that it's just sort of literally a risky thing to do?
Well, I think this also comes down to the idea of independence, which is we have specifically made it a point to avoid at all costs, of which there have been some, having publishers, having investors, having loans, right? Because the most trouble that you can get in your business or whatever comes from other people.
Yeah.
Right. Specifically via lawsuits, ownership disputes, all this stuff. And so part of the philosophy of being independent is trying to come up with ways to keep yourself self-contained and have as few of those connections going as possible, so that you're more secure.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I just finished reading Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. Adam and I both read this, which is written by one of the editors at Kotaku. So if anybody's interested in sort of just the overall process of how games are made, this book basically takes 10 very well-known games and dives into the actual process that went through it, a bunch of interviews and that sort of thing. Sort of a storytelling format of how those things were made. And you'll notice a theme throughout it, which is that a lot of the companies that have investors or publisher backing, where the publisher is actually paying for the game,
that's where their problems
that's oftentimes where a lot of their problems came from, because the publisher would back out, or funding would just dry up, or they would lose communication for a long period of time, and then that, like all this sort of stuff. So
it wasn't always that the sort of the publisher was the cause of it. It was actually the miscommunication and differences in interests and desires between the two parties that caused. So it wasn't exactly that, like, oh, the publishers decided to pull out and that was the end of it. It's that the publisher was investing enormous amounts of money and then were worried they weren't going to get a return because this company was mismanaging something, right? And to me, like, because I think that was a takeaway that at first I was interpreting all these as like, oh god, the fucking publishers are ruining everything. But as I started trying to pay a little bit more attention to exactly what was happening, that definitely did happen.
Yeah, there's a few
on several occasions. But the more common one was actually that it was, so, and this is still a problem, which is that when you have that level of dependence on another party, then your ability to all be on the same page and have the same goals in mind becomes more and more problematic, especially when you're working with some enormous company, because their goals are not your goals. They just can't be. And there's no way for you actually to align those visions together. And so even if that company is operating really quite fairly, like in its best interest, but also saying like, hey, we're giving you a fuck ton of money, we expect to see what you told us you would provide. Right. And if it turns out you're like, actually, we decided to make a different game because we think this game is just better and we're better suited to do it. And then that, your parent company is like, well, that's not what we agreed. That's not what we agreed on. That's not what we need for our lineup, because we have our external other dependencies that we have. So yeah,
it's tricky.
Goals are misaligned, communication. Yeah.
So, but it is all about reducing your level of dependencies on stuff, because you can't be part of a team with a single vision when there are third parties you have no control over who are controlling you in some way.
And they've got their own vision.
This is true of things like Kickstarters with backer rewards and just what you promise at a Kickstarter. This is also why we avoid that, is because now all of a sudden you're beholden to your fans.
Well, we actually have, we talked about Hive Jump quite a while back. They ran a Kickstarter, and a big part of their Kickstarter was Wii U support.
Yeah, this was a couple of years ago.
And all that. But yeah, well, but it was even before the Switch was referred to as the Nintendo DX, right? Or
NX.
NX. Like DS and whatever.
2 letters.
And so Wii U support was a big promise that they had made to their Kickstarter backers, and they just recently,
I think they're next week they're launching on Wii U, something like that.
Which now the Switch has been out forever. The Wii U is kind of old news, and we also know that it was a big process for them to get that game.
No joke,
and had that pressure not been there from those backers, who said the only reason I backed this was because of the Wii U.
Well, this is even the case of in Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, they talk about Shovel Knight, which is sort of this beloved indie icon now. And one of the things they promised in Shovel Knight was that you could play as these other knights, and without realizing the amount of work that they had to do.
Well, of course, the entire game was designed around the mechanic of the main character.
Exactly. Yeah. Which meant if you wanted to play something else, they would have to rebuild the whole game again. And I think are they just on their third one now?
Something like that, yeah.
The final one they're just doing now. This was like 3 years ago this thing came out, right?
That's more than that, I think.
Was it longer than that?
It's quite a while ago.
So they've been working on Shovel Knight now for years. And they even mentioned it in the thing. They're like, yeah, we definitely over-promised on this stuff. And 100%. So you'd be really careful with that sort of stuff to reduce dependency. That's part of the reason why, with what we're talking about, how we're approaching the announcement of Scuffle Buddies and the information we're leaking out, we're being very close to the chest with stuff this time.
Do we want to talk about promises? Promises made to the community?
In what capacity?
We have some questions from some people
about a thing.
I mean, while we're on the topic,
let's go.
So we got a question from Woland77. A lot has been said about announcing video games and features too early. Did you announce the Crashlands creator too early?
Damn, Woland.
Do you think it would have been better to say nothing and work on it or not? in quiet.
Yes.
I think
So here's what we didn't know about the creator. We probably could have known had we taken 2 steps back and thought more about it. Is user generated content is awesome, and it provides like an extended life cycle for your game because there's all this new stuff, right? But there's 2 dimensions to it that we didn't think hard enough about. One is the amount of moderation. And we thought we'll build in some systems, to try to allow the community to self-moderate. But it's not, you're not going to catch everything with that, right? Which does mean that having something like the creator where we have people making their own campaigns, making their own stories, and then posting that online, and then allowing anybody to play those things, it means we lose control over sort of the, I guess, what do we want to call it? Like the rating of the game, right? Like how it, like right now we say, here's what's in the game.
It's gonna go to NC-17 real quick.
Like we know that the game is for like 13 and up, right? And once we get that creator in there, it's now an X-rated game, right? Because there's going to be a lot of stuff in there. And this also means so that's a hugely increased moderation burden on us. But the second thing that we didn't even really think about was what this means for the different platforms that the game is on, because every platform has their own requirements of things like, approval of content, or even there are some platforms that we're working on where we can't even use Butterscotch ID.
Right. In
which case, how do you use the creator, right? If you can't log into any web stuff, then they actually cuts off creator access. And so we were working on navigating these things for basically all of 2016.
And also the UI, there's also always that question of, well, if this is for kind of advanced users and the idea is it's supposed to be like a power tool and that kind of thing, then just how good does the UI have to be, right? Because it was
also how mobile friendly does
how mobile friendly does it have to be and all these questions. So for us, we got to, so because I built it, so I got to just teach other people how it worked, right? And so there were a lot of known like weird wonky things, but we could just say, yeah, we know this is wonky, just don't do that.
Just work around it.
But that's insufficient when putting that thing into the wild. And I think that was definitely the biggest programming project that I had taken on up to that point, was building the creator, back end system and its front end. And at that time, I didn't realize just how far away I was with the thing that I made from what would be required for a thing that other people like outside of the studio could use en masse, because otherwise the support burden that would have been created, similar to the dealing with moderation, would have been fucking enormous, because if that thing wasn't polished and tight and like perfectly understandable with an enormous FAQ and documentation, then all of a sudden now we would have been on the hook for teaching people how to use it and helping them with problems and dealing with bugs and that kind of stuff. The
difference between a developer version and a sort of polished consumer version,
right?
We're like, as devs, we know the code of the game. Like we know how everything works under the hood, and so we didn't have to have any of this stuff in the creator. It's all just we know how it works, so no instructions needed, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, which is all to say, I actually am not sure, with hindsight, which is that we promised the thing because we still could have delivered. If there was an enormous demand for it, we could have delivered on that. We could have dedicated our resources and made that happen, despite all of the surprisingly enormous costs that went into it. Right. I would say Crashlands was not at the level of success it would need to be for that to be something that there was a high enough demand for to like really push us to do it, and that would have been a good use of our time. That wouldn't have actually put our studio. Yeah, that wouldn't have sunk the studio, because the amount of time that would have needed to go into it was really quite large. But we had every intention of doing it, and a lot of the time was just thinking, well, we'll see how well the game does. If it does super well, so people are like wanting more content, then this would be a great way to do that. And further, again, like the thing was already there and it already existed. We just have to polish it up for users, right? That was kind of the idea.
We just have to polish it up. Because it is the tool that we used to build the entire campaign.
Right.
So, it's very flexible. It can do all kinds of things.
Right. And so yeah, I think we were very excited about the possibility of doing it, and I think rightly. Because
actually, we'll also bear in mind that when we announced the creator for the game was during the Greenlight campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And during the Greenlight campaign, we actually didn't even have the story made for the game yet. So
the creator was almost
the
done.
creator was basically almost done, and we were like, this tool is badass. Like we're gonna be able to do all kinds of awesome stuff with this. And so we just announced that this is gonna be a thing.
Well, and I think part of it was also there was this question of how just like, trying to do as much as possible to make people actually care. And that was one of the big things at the time is we didn't want it to be the case that people felt like, say, I mean, of course, it's funny because it's $5 on mobile, but $15 on Steam, whatever, that they weren't necessarily getting the bang for the buck. And so any of these features that because the plan was completely to do it, to build it out. Any of these features that seemed like they were on the horizon were put in that. So the story was not written at the time of that, even though it talks about the story. The creator was basically done, but hadn't been sort of
As an internal
tool, not at all as an external tool. And this happens a lot in games. And there's actually the Blood, Sweat, and Pixels thing actually has a lot of this about E3 demos. And there's this big question because literally most of the demos that you see at E3 for these big fancy games end up being nothing like the final product because the team actually crunches super hard to make this polished experience that is sort of the distilled idea of what that game is going to be. And then oftentimes, especially if they're mismanaged, none of that stuff ends up in the final game at all.
Yep.
The sequence, none of the models, like anything.
Well, and there's a decision point you have to make because it's also the case that if like we're experiencing this with controller support where we went back through our Steam reviews just to see if there was anything that we could work on with Crashness to kind of like
tidy that.
Anything that's bothering people about the game or whatever. And a really significant proportion of our negative reviews come from people for whom the controller support is not quite working the way that they would like it to, or that, something. And so we're working on fixing those problems for people. But at the same time, some of those people are people who bought the game because of the controller support. And then because it didn't quite match their expectations, they give us a negative review, which is fair, right? Because like we put this feature into the game that was like, it's like 95% good, but that last 5% can actually ruin the game for you, right?
Yep.
And so if the same thing happens with the creator, right? You get a new influx of people who are like, "Ooh, I want to like build my own stories, build my own campaigns." Right. And if the creator is hard to use, if it's hard to understand, if it doesn't quite behave the way they expect, then all of a sudden that just brings in an influx of negative reviews, right? Because it's a feature that just isn't good. Right?
Sometimes it's better to cut stuff than to do it at all. Is the truth?
Yeah.
And
you can't then. There's a certain level of self-sacrifice, like what we're seeing with like Hive Jump with the Wii U. We know those guys, and we know the amount of blood and sweat that went into getting that Wii U version ready. And for what, right? Like the console didn't ever do that well. And now that the Switch is out, it's like way old news, right? And so, and it's just to adhere to a promise that they've now, who knows what they had to give up in terms of development and other actually cool things that they could have been working on and building for their community.
Right. So I think a lot of these is just, it comes down to just confronting the fact that sometimes you make mistakes as a studio.
Yeah. Yeah. That was
like talking about the creator was a huge mistake. Well, then pointed out, like, do you think you talked? Yeah, absolutely.
We did. Well, and also if you look at now what we're doing with Scuffle Buddies, this is
why
we're keeping a bit of a lid on
because we have plenty of things that we're pretty sure are going to be in the game, but until they're in this time.
Well, and even then,
who knows?
Then there are things that will probably be in the game, but may end up just being very different.
Yeah.
Than what and if you want to see an example of this, go back and look at some of the early dev blog posts about Crashlands. There's one post that I find particularly hilarious where there's like 4 really important game systems that we talk about, that are like, that we viewed at the time as sort of, crowning, like bread and butter, crowning achievements of this game. None of them are in the final game. Literally none of them. And you can see how those systems probably evolved to turn into what was in the final game. But it's even stuff like right now, Crashlands, you run around the world, you find teleporters, and like that's how you get around. We never had that at the beginning. Yep. One of the cool
built a teleporter network.
Yeah, one of the cool things that we put in was the idea of a teleporter network. You build your own teleporters, and then you decide where those are going to go, and then they had to be within range of other teleporters, and they would link together. So you would, as you explore the world, you would kind of create your own mechanism of transport. But it turned out that once you had like 30 teleporters down and you were viewing the network of interlinked nodes and stuff, it was just really hard to see anything on the map. And also it was just kind of tedious to always have to be placing teleporters. So we thought it was cool, and it was at first, and then it sucked, right? And so we just ripped the whole, like that whole system disappeared, and then it became, there just are teleporters, right?
So I guess what's the status? I guess what's the general notion with the creator at this point?
To me, the creator is still. So I wouldn't say like it's not quite in the incinerator. For me, it's just sitting.
It's teetering.
If the incinerator was like a rectangular, trash can like thing, it would be just literally sitting on the edge of it right now, right? And that's because I still really want to have it. And again, like all the guts are there. The point where we're at now, though, is that right now I'm in the middle of completely just redoing Butterscotch ID. So literally every system is different. It's going to live on
built with new technology.
Live on different things. It's going to have different functionality. Everything about it's different. So what that means is that all of my old stuff that has been written is both obsolete and also just not a thing I can just go like use. Can't go recover it. So the creator would then have to be rebuilt entirely, completely from scratch. There are a lot of advantages though to that, which is that most of the reason it was such a pain in the ass to deal with in the first place and why it ended up being so hard to make was because of the tech it was using. And so by not just having none of that would actually speed up development a lot. Further, now that Andy's here and he's working on all the front end stuff, now I don't have to do both.
Right.
And so that there will come a point in the next, sort of like 6 months to a year where we will have the technical ability to just like redo it. And we'll have the new systems, all the new BSCD systems sort of like underlining it, girding the whole thing, ready to have that built on top of it. The question will be at that point is the relative value, right? Because at that same time, we'll be doing all kinds of unknown Scuffle Buddy stuff. What if we decide, and we haven't even talked about this, so don't think of this as a thing we're going to do. But what if we decide we want to put this same idea into Scuffle Buddies, but for real though, right? So let's say that we say, all right, we're going to make a campaign editor, or we want to make a map editor. We're going to do something, right? We want people to make user generated content of some sort. Then I'm definitely not going to have time to do that and like rebuild the creator. And so for me, what I'm treating the creator as is once everything has been ported to these new systems, once Crashlands is updated with the new Butterscotch ID, like once we're beyond this tech debt window, and once all of the main really important things are solved for Scuffle Buddies, which there's a lot of, and we're in some window, there's like some time, because a lot of the reason that I have so much work right now is because I'm rebuilding Butterscotch ID. Yeah. After Scuffle Buddies, and then we set off to make the next game, I'm not remaking Butterscotch ID again at that point, right? Certainly fucking hope not. So,
it's been a big undertaking.
It's enormous, and so that's going to take literally like a year of work off my plate for the following thing. And so right now there's just no gap in the things that I have to do. There's not one in the near future either, right? But at some point there may come a time when I actually can choose to spend time on this kinds of stuff. And I would like to actually. So for me, it's like, this is not I'm not trying to keep it as a promise that we like need to keep, but it just truly is a thing that I think would be awesome. And
it would be a big undertaking to make it feasible. And it's almost entirely on the web dev team. Yep. Because the game
is basically
the game just eats the data that comes from the creator and then just turns it into a campaign.
Yep.
So
it's all on us, which we just need the Slack to do it. And
someday
we may.
Butterscotch ID 2 is currently, there is no Slack.
There's no Slack.
So.
Well, it's going to be, and once we're done with that, then it's all Scuffle Buddies, whatever that needs, right? So we're easily a year away from having Slack to actually like go back and rebuild this thing. So who knows? I still like
on the edge of this.
Yeah, I still really hope we can pull it off, but by the time we can, Crashlands might be so dead that there's just nobody playing.
Or maybe this would be the thing that brings it back to life.
And it might actually be. And to me, that's actually one of the things is that it's good to look back periodically at something we've made and ask,
what can we do?
Can we put some life back into this? So that people get interested again. And something like the Crashlands creator is a good example of that. That even if the game is like on its deathbed, it's getting like a download a day and we've moved on, and even when we get to that point, there's
and we're on our deathbeds.
It might very well be the case that we can kind of revive the game by launching something as different and cool and interesting as a cross-platform campaign creator.
Or maybe we just don't worry about it, and then we just keep it in mind when we make Crashlands 2,
right?
Which
we
is the thing that everybody wants us to do.
Yeah. Which we are currently not making. It is not on the docket, and we've not even thought.
Now, let me ask you this though: what are we gonna do? So right now, with everything that we create that has a comments box on it, the top 35 comments are Crashlands 2. What about Crashlands 2? What are we gonna do when half of those comments are Crashlands 2 and the other half is Scuffle Buddies 2? Are we gonna have to make?
I guess we'll have to make one of them.
We're gonna have to get
these people off our back.
Yeah,
or make neither of them
Crash Buddies and just merge the whole thing.
This is this sort of this anti peer pressure, don't tell me what to do approach, right? Which is the more people ask for a thing, the less likely we are to give it.
The more we're going to give them something else even more amazing they didn't even know they wanted.
Yeah, so it's not a normal peer pressure situation, but
I think our goal is to have a few different properties that are established and were successful before we start doing the sequel route.
Sequelizing.
Because I mean, there's always more stuff to explore in any one of the games we make, but it'd be nice to have a few very different concepts out there so that if we're like, oh, we want to go, I don't know, work on an RTS, but we have one that we built that was kick-ass, and we go build a second one that's even more kick-ass.
Well, but I think also getting to explore different sort of genre niches and audience niches is really important, because with something like Crashlands, Crashlands has these weirdly direct competitors in the market, namely Don't Starve, right? Yep. That I think most people who play both would say actually they're quite different, but actually still a lot of people don't. They still see them as like just versions of the same game, right? And so it's a lot less compelling to make another game that has a whole bunch of direct competitors that everybody feels like it's the same game versus just try to make something entirely new so we can try to find our own space. Because once we do that, now all of a sudden we've set that genre, we've created that niche, and we can now add awesome new stuff in there, and we can actually provide stuff that nobody has access to because it just doesn't exist anywhere else.
One thing I can say about Scuffle Buddies, without giving anything away, is there's not going to be any direct competitors.
You have not played. You have not played a thing like this.
No. It's going to be weird. Which is actually the big challenge: is how do we talk about it and explain it? Which we're not going to do yet, so don't worry about it. But it is something that's on our mind.
But it does give us a chance of having Scuffle Buddies too, where people are like, oh yeah, just like this is the one place where I can get this kind of thing. Right?
Yeah.
And they can be excited about a freshened up version of that.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting.
Cool.
So, all right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. So we'd like to thank our studio wrangler, Monique, for putting this episode together, our producer, Fat Bard, for making us sound good, and the Butterscotch dev team, Andy, Tifa, and Sher, for continuing to build stuff while we're in here podcasting. Special thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord and forums running. And, of course, we'd like to thank you, all our listeners, for coming back every week to hear us yammer. If you'd like to get more involved in the Butterscotch community, hop into our Discord server at bit.ly/bsdiscord. Come say hi. We have been paying a little bit more attention to it since the Scuffle Buddies announcement, although we're trying to get some work done, so don't go too crazy in there, you kids. Also, we have a mailbox, so if you'd like to send us candy or a letter, preferably candy, head on over to mailbox.bscotch.net, and we've got our address over there. Also, we depend on word of mouth and great reviews to get new listeners. Right now, we're pushing for 100 reviews on Apple Podcasts. So if you have an account there, if you're listening through there, we would really appreciate it. It would help us out a lot if you head over there to give us a 5-star review. You can also go to bit.ly/CwB Apple, and that'll kind of shortcut you right over there. So that'll help us out, and we'd appreciate it. So thank you all for listening.
Did you also include the email address?
Ooh,
you need to add that to your speech.
To my speech. What's the email address? podcast@bscotch.net.
Trying to keep straightforward, nice and easy.
Yeah.
You'll get an auto reply. I think the auto reply might be a little wonky, so just deal with that for the moment.
Yeah. So if you want to just say something, you don't necessarily want to ask a question to be read on the podcast. Or
if you don't want to post it in that public space or something for whatever. We got our first one came in last week, and it was from somebody who pointed out that I could be doing a better job at security in a very specific kind of way on the web. So thank you for that. It was but in a nice, useful way.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that we don't necessarily need to be in a public forum. Yeah. It's a more of a good private question.
So that was nice, and I appreciate that. If there's anything, if you just want to send your thoughts on stuff, just hit up podcast@bscotch.net. It's going to go. It'll then get forwarded to kind of whoever you're sort of directing it at. So just know that we will read them all, whatever you send.
We will.
The auto reply, just because we're going to try not to do it immediately because we got stuff we're trying to do, so
We got scuffles to make.
yep. So just know we're going to get it.
twos.
We're going to read it. We may or may not reply, but we definitely are actually reading that stuff.
Yeah. So that's podcast@bscotch.net. That's the email address. Not to be confused with podcast.bscotch.net, which is the website. So, all right. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Maybe
all
I should
for
have had it
listening.
be podcast@bscotch.net.
That's good.
That's what I should have done.
Maybe not, though. Okay. That's all we got for this week. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.